The rooftop of the St. Regis Hotel was a desolate, windswept island of gravel and steel, overlooking the shimmering, neon-lit arteries of Manhattan. It was 11:45 p.m. Below, the city was a chaotic symphony of yellow cabs and late-night revelers, but up here, the only sound was the low, rhythmic hum of the massive industrial air conditioning units. Mickey the Ghost Sullivan, a man who had earned his name by vanishing into shadows before the blood even hit the floor, was lying prone on the edge of the roof. He was a professional, a technician of death. His rifle, a custom-built Remington 700, was braced against a sandbag, its long, matte black barrel pointed directly at the penthouse balcony across the street. Sullivan checked his watch. In exactly 2 minutes, Frank Costello would step out for his nightly cigar, a creature of habit that Sullivan intended to exploit for a 7-figure payout from the Genovese family. Sullivan reached for his gear bag and pulled out the long, cylindrical suppressor, the silencer that would turn a lethal shot into a mere whisper in the wind. He screwed it onto the muzzle with practiced precision, feeling the threads lock into place. He felt invincible. He felt like the hand of fate itself. But what Mickey Sullivan didn't know was that shadows have eyes, and those eyes belong to the Prime Minister. Frank Costello didn't just survive assassination attempts. He curated them. He treated his enemies' plans like drafts of a play that he was the head editor of. As Sullivan adjusted his scope, centering the crosshairs on the empty wicker chair on the opposite balcony, he didn't notice the slight, almost imperceptible difference in the weight of his suppressor. He didn't notice that the interior baffles had been removed and replaced with a complex, high-frequency acoustic chamber, a masterpiece of humiliation designed by Costello's personal armorer. Sullivan took a deep breath, slowing his heart rate, his finger resting lightly on the cold steel of the trigger. He saw the balcony door open. He saw the familiar silhouette of Frank Costello. Draped in a silk robe, stepping into the cool night air. Costello didn't look like a man in danger. He looked like a man waiting for a performance to begin. If you are watching this and you can feel your pulse quickening, then you are ready to witness the most embarrassing defeat in the history of the underworld. Most leaders hire more guards when they hear there's a hit out on them. But Frank Costello? He hires a musician to retune the assassin's instrument. We are breaking down the acoustic ambush, the ultimate psychological move where a secret execution is turned into a public announcement of incompetence. If you want to learn how to flip the script so hard that your enemy becomes your unintentional herald, if you want to see how the Prime Minister uses the laws of physics to destroy a man's reputation, then you are in the right place. Hit that subscribe button right now to join the elite 1% who play the game 5 moves ahead. Like this video to show that you recognize Costello's whistle gambit as the peak of tactical brilliance. And I want you to go to the comments right now and type "whistle" in all caps. Let's see who among you is ready for the loud truth. Now, let's go back to that rooftop, where Mickey Sullivan was about to wake up the entire city. Costello reached into his pocket, pulled out a gold lighter, and sparked a cigar. The flame illuminated his face for a split second, a perfect beacon for any marksman. Sullivan exhaled, his body becoming a statue. He aligned the crosshairs with the center of Costello's chest. Took a half breath, and squeezed the trigger. He expected the familiar, muffled thud of a suppressed shot. He expected to see Costello collapse silently into the wicker chair. Instead, what happened next would become a legend in the dark alleys of New York. The moment the firing pin struck, the rifle didn't whisper. It screamed. A piercing, high-pitched, ear-shattering whistle erupted from the muzzle, a sound so loud, so shrill, and so sustained that it echoed off the skyscrapers like 1,000 police sirens at once. It wasn't just a noise, it was a signal that tore through the midnight air, shattering the silence of the Upper East Side. Sullivan scrambled back in pure, unadulterated shock, dropping the rifle as if it were made of white-hot lava. His ears were ringing, his heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He looked over the edge of the roof and saw the impossible. Frank Costello hadn't moved. He was still standing on the balcony, calmly puffing on his cigar, looking directly at Sullivan's position. Costello raised his glass in a mock toast, the golden liquid shimmering in the moonlight. Below them, on the street level, the whistle had done exactly what it was designed to do. Within seconds, the quiet street was flooded with light. Not from the police, but from Costello's own private security force, 30 men who had been waiting in the shadows of the doorways and the parked cars. Triggered by the very sound Sullivan had just produced, What did you do to my gun?" Sullivan whispered into the void, his voice trembling with a terror he had never felt before. He looked at the suppressor he had just used. It was a masterpiece of deception. From the outside, it looked like a standard-issue military silencer. But the interior was a whistle mechanism designed to harness the explosive gas of a .308 round and convert it into pure, focused sound. Costello hadn't just disarmed him, he had turned Sullivan into a human alarm system. Sullivan tried to reach for his handgun, but his fingers were numb. He realized then that the whistle wasn't just a prank. It was a dinner bell. And the predators were already on the stairs. The heavy steel door to the roof was kicked open with a thunderous bang. 2 of Costello's janitors stepped out, their faces obscured by the shadows of their hats. They didn't have their guns drawn. They didn't need to. Sullivan was already paralyzed by the magnitude of his failure. In the underworld, a silent kill is a promotion. A loud failure is a death sentence. But this? This was something worse. This was a joke that the entire commission would be laughing about by sunrise. Costello had turned the city's most feared assassin into a clown. Sullivan looked back at the balcony one last time. Costello was gone, the door to the penthouse closed. Leaving only a lingering trail of cigar smoke, the janitors walked toward him with a slow, deliberate pace. "Mr. Costello wants to thank you for the announcement, Mickey," one of them said, his voice a low, mocking growl. "He's been trying to get the Genovese family's attention for weeks. You just told them everything they need to know." Sullivan realized that he hadn't just failed to kill Costello, he had officially declared war on behalf of the people who hired him, a war they weren't ready for, triggered by a shot that never landed. He was the messenger of his own doom, and the message had been heard by every ear from Harlem to the Battery, as the janitors grabbed Sullivan by the arms. He looked at his rifle lying on the gravel. The whistles was still there, a silver and black monument to his stupidity. Frank Costello hadn't fired a single bullet, hadn't raised his voice, and hadn't even broken his evening routine. He had simply changed the acoustics of the night. He had proven that in New York, the Prime Minister doesn't just control the streets, he controls the volume. Sullivan was led away into the darkness of the stairwell, leaving the rooftop empty, save for the echoing ghost of that shrill, piercing whistle that still seemed to hang in the air, a reminder to the city that the king was not only alive, but he was enjoying the show. The penthouse of the St. Regis was no longer a sanctuary of quiet luxury, it had become the courtroom of a man who sat above the law. Mickey Sullivan was shoved into the center of the room, his knees hitting the thick Persian rug with a dull thud. His ears were still ringing from the piercing shriek of the modified suppressor, a sound that felt like it had permanently scarred his brain. The janitors stood behind him, their hands folded in front of them like grim statues. Frank Costello was sitting in a leather chair by the fireplace, the orange glow of the embers dancing in his grey eyes. He was still wearing his silk robe, a half-finished glass of cognac on the small table beside him. He looked at Sullivan not with anger, but with the curiosity of a scientist examining a failed experiment. "Do you hear that, Mickey?" Costello asked, his voice a low, melodic rasp that seemed to cut through the ringing in Sullivan's ears. "That's the sound of 5 million people wondering what just happened. That's the sound of the Genovese family realizing that their ghost is actually a loud, clumsy child." Sullivan looked up, his face a mask of sweat and shame. "How did you get to my gear, Frank?" "I keep it in a locked vault. I'm the only one with the code. No one touches my rifles. No one." Costello leaned forward, the shadows of the room lengthening around him. He picked up the whistle suppressor from the table and tossed it into Sullivan's lap. "You think codes and locks matter in my city, Mickey? You think because you're a ghost that you're invisible to me? I didn't need to break into your vault. I owned the man who built it. I owned the man who drove you to this hotel. I've owned every step of your journey since you took the contract 3 weeks ago." Costello took a slow sip of his cognac, letting the silence build until it was a physical weight. "I didn't want you dead, Mickey. A dead assassin is just a statistic. A humiliated assassin is a message. If you are watching this and you can feel the air getting colder, then you are finally witnessing the true essence of the Prime Minister's power. Most bosses kill to show strength. Frank Costello embarrasses to show absolute control. He doesn't just defeat you, he makes you a joke that the entire world is in on. We are breaking down the public branding strategy, the moment where a secret enemy is forced into the brightest spotlight, losing their only weapon, their reputation. If you want to learn how to turn a hidden threat into a public liability, if you want to see how Costello uses the ego of his enemies to dismantle their entire network, then you are in the right place. Hit that subscribe button right now to join the masters of the invisible war. Like this video to show that you recognize the whistle as the most lethal sound in New York. And I want you to go to the comments right now and type "echo" in all caps. Let's see who among you understands that some sounds never stop ringing. Now, let's see what happened to the men who sent Mickey Sullivan to that roof. As Costello spoke, the phone on the side table began to ring. He didn't answer it immediately. He let it ring 6, 7, 8 times, the sound cutting through the tension of the room like a blade. Finally, he picked it up and put it on speaker. "Frank? Is that you?" The voice on the other end was frantic, high-pitched, and filled with a terror that Sullivan recognized instantly. It was Carmine the Blade Genovese, the man who had authorized the hit. "What was that noise, Frank? The whole city is talking. My contacts at the precinct say the sirens are headed toward the St. Regis. Did something go wrong?" Costello looked directly at Sullivan as he answered, a thin, cruel smile touching his lips. "Everything went exactly as I planned, Carmine. Your ghoster just gave me a very loud wake-up call. I thought it was only fair that I share the noise with you." Costello signaled to one of the janitors, who stepped forward and opened a large briefcase on the floor. Inside was a series of high-definition monitors showing live feeds from 3 different Genovese warehouses across the city. As the whistle had sounded on the roof, Costello's private security teams, who had been pre-positioned for days, had launched a simultaneous, non-lethal raid. They weren't there to kill. They were there to audit. On the screens, Sullivan could see Genovese soldiers being disarmed and zip-tied, while Costello's men began loading truckloads of ledger books, cash, and narcotics into their own vans. "You see, Carmine," Costello said into the phone, "the whistle wasn't just for Mickey. It was the starting gun for the seizure of your entire Manhattan operation. While you were waiting for a silent hit, I was executing a very loud acquisition." The line went dead. Carmine Genovese didn't even have the breath to argue. He had been outplayed on a level that bypassed the street and struck at the very heart of his business. Costello turned back to Sullivan, who was now staring at the monitors in disbelief. Everything he had worked for, every secret he had kept for the Genovese family, was being hauled away in the back of Costello's trucks. "You're wondering why you're still breathing, aren't you, Mickey?" Costello asked, standing up and walking toward the window. He looked out at the city, where the flashing blue and red lights of the NYPD were finally arriving at the hotel. "It's because you're going to be my witness. You're going to go back to the street, and you're going to tell everyone exactly what happens when you try to bring a silence to my city. You're going to tell them that Frank Costello doesn't just hear the shot, he hears the thought behind it." Costello reached into the pocket of his robe and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. He handed it to Sullivan. Inside that whistle, there was a small engraving, "Mickey. I'm sure you didn't have time to read it before you pulled the trigger. It said, 'The loudest dog has the shortest life.' But I've decided to be merciful tonight. You're going to live, but you're going to live with the sound of that whistle in your head every time you close your eyes. You're no longer a ghost. You're an echo of my mercy." Costello nodded to the janitors, who hauled Sullivan to his feet. "Take him out the service entrance. Give him his rifle back, minus the whistle. I want him to have a souvenir of the night he woke up New York." As Sullivan was led away, the sound of the police sirens grew louder, reflecting off the glass of the penthouse. But Costello wasn't worried about the police. The police were just the clean-up crew for a mess he had already solved. He had taken the Genovese's best man, their best assets, and their secret plans, and he had done it all with a piece of modified brass. He had turned a lethal threat into a marketing campaign for his own invincibility. He sat back down in his chair, picked up his glass of cognac, and watched as the blue and red lights danced across the ceiling. He felt the city settle back into its familiar rhythm, a rhythm that he dictated. That night of the whistle became the stuff of legend, a story that would be told in every social club and backroom for the next 50 years. It was the night that proved that the Prime Minister didn't need to be louder than his enemies, he just needed to make sure their own noise was their undoing. Frank Costello had faced the ghost and turned him into a bell ringer. He had taken the silence of a hit and turned it into the roar of a kingdom. As the sun began to rise over the Atlantic, painting the skyscrapers in shades of gold and fire, Frank Costello closed his eyes. The city was quiet again, exactly the way he liked it. He had audited the air itself, and the only sound left was the steady, rhythmic ticking of a clock that answered only to him. The war was over, the message was delivered, and the Prime Minister was still the only man in New York who could hear the truth before it was even whispered.